I just finished watching the whole season last night, and I feel like I have so many questions that I cannot ask about. But I would love to start with how this all began for you, because you're coming off of a show like Supernatural, which had such an impressive run. But then thinking about next steps, what made you want to take on something like this series as your next project?
It was two things. It was, number one is I'm just a huge fan of Resident Evil. You know what I mean? And the games and the movies, the games were defining in a way for me, just for the horror genre, period. In terms of like, they really formed kind of what I think horror is and what really works. And you can see that in Supernatural at different points. And then, the movies I think are a bit underrated because they were one of the first movies that really took multiple genres and kind of shuffled them together. Whether it's sci-fi and horror and action and everything else. So they were really kind of defining in two different ways. So when the opportunity came about, I was like, oh, I would love to do that. The lore is so interesting. And it was like, okay, well, if you're going to do it, how can you make it feel different than kind of what's out there? And luckily, Resident Evil itself has a lot of elements that you can do that with the monsters and some of the backstory and the corporate maneuverings and the crazy conspiracies. And then they kind of allowed us, they being Netflix and Capcom, to kind of build on that as well. So the games are the backstory, but we kind of now are kind of, branching off into our own little world.
So I guess that brings me to my next question. What can you kind of reveal or explain about the show's timeline for people who are wondering about where this fits into the larger Resident Evil universe?
Sure. So basically everything game-wise that's been released up to now, which is, Village, is our backstory. And from that point, the games are going to go this direction and we're going to go this direction. And believe me, if the games do something, if we're lucky enough to go more seasons and the games do something awesome and like Resident Evil 9, like we will steal that. We will happily steal that. But we're not informing the games. Capcom has their own beautiful plan for where they plan to take things. That's great. And then the movies are I would say, like an alternate reality. You know what I mean? Certainly tonally, staging wise, we're certainly inspired by the movies. Like I love the movies. But the Alice character, things like that, don't really exist in this world.
It's like the Resident Evil multiverse.
It's like the Resident Evil exactly. The good news is we're all very familiar with multiverses now, so it fits right in.
What's the biggest challenge that people might not be aware of when it comes to tackling a show like this that is based in existing IP?
I think the biggest thing is a lot of times when you're dealing with IP, you're dealing with what I would call like dead IP. So it's a novel that exists or a movie series that came out 20 years ago. Resident Evil has, when we were developing it, had a movie, it had an animated series, it had another game coming out, and us. That's about as alive as IP gets. You know what I mean? So you want to do something that, again, feels at peace with everything else, but is distinctively its own thing. And doesn't feel like, it's not like you watch the movie and you watch the show, you're like, oh, that's the same story. Why would I watch that again? You know what I mean? Or you watch the show and you play the games, you're like, why am I doing this? My hope is that everything kind of folds into each other and you'll watch the show and you'll get to the end of it and be like, you know what? I really want to go play those games. Or I really don't want to go watch and Netflix will come up and be like, watch the Resident Evil movie. And we're like, I would like to watch that. And you watch it and it feels of a world. You know what I mean? So hopefully everything kind of dovetails together in a way.
I feel like when watching this, I mean, and you get the sense from the trailers too, but Umbrella is over everything, which is fitting considering the name, but what can you share about this incarnation of Umbrella in the show and what they've been up to?
Yeah, so Umbrella, for most of its history was essentially a weapons manufacturer for the US government. That didn't go so great for various reasons, which if you played the games, And Umbrella now, under Evelyn Marcus, her father kind of founded the company. It was stolen from him. She's kind of come in and picked up the pieces and rebuilt Umbrella in a different image, one that is a bit more, it's like Pfizer or something along those lines, right? Moderna. But with kind of that old school, maybe questionably, ethically questionable DNA. So that's the fun of it. The fun of it is, you look at it like a company like, Atari or whatever that kind of goes down and then it kind of gets built back up, which by the way is a very old reference, which because Atari no longer exists. But at one point it went through that cycle. You just have to trust me on that.
I feel like you can't talk about Resident Evil without talking about the monsters. They're the creatures, and there are some gnarly ones in this show. I'm not sure what you can say, but what can you kind of tease so far for fans in terms of what we'll get to see? I think, when it comes to the monsters, both kind of the zombies and kind of what we call like super zombies, zombies that maybe aren't your traditional, guys chasing brains.
And then the hybrid creatures as well. What we wanted to do is, these are things that a lot of them have existed in the games in kind of one form or another. We wanted to put our own twist on them and also make them kind of feel like something that exists on, streaming today. The visual effects have gotten so much better, not just since the movies, but like in the last 2 years when it comes to television specifically and streaming specifically, that it was really fun to kind of bring those things to life. And hopefully, knock on wood, we'll get to continue to do that.
I feel like the show, it's definitely rooted in the lore of the games, the world of the games. But one of the themes I think that really struck me watching is family, this intimate sense of family, family connection. But it's coming from a surprising source in Albert Wesker. What can you say about the relationship that he and his daughters have this season? Yeah,
and that's on purpose. You know what I mean? We wanted fans of the games to see Albert like as a suburban dad and be like, how did that happen? You know what I mean? And then we kind of explore that over the course of the games. I think his relationship with his daughters it's complicated. You know what I mean? Like, they're his daughters and he loves them, but at the same time, like, he's a very distant father. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of parents kind of view their kids as, again, this is maybe me projecting too much of my own life, a means to an end. And I think Albert looks at his daughters in that way a little bit too. You know what I mean? Like, yes, he had them because he wanted kids, but he also had them for a reason.
With the show being linked to the franchise in its own way, I would say, are there any specific franchise characters that you were hoping to be able to introduce at some point beyond who we've met so far?
All of them. That's my hope. If the show runs long enough. Look, there certainly, by the end of the show, we're kind of teasing characters, including Ada Wong. If we're lucky enough to have a season 2, I think we can expect multiple characters from the games to appear in ways that are, kind of inevitable, I think, and hopefully a little bit surprising.
Provided you do get a season 2, are we going to see more of the dual timeline, kind of the back and forth between the past and the present as those mysteries begin to unfold?
Yes, definitely.
On that note, I am all out of time, but thank you so much for your time to sit and chat with me about the show. It's been great to get to pick your brain a little, and I'm excited for the rest of the world to finally get to see it. So
me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.